Good morning. My name is Mike Yazena of Menorcan Magic Handmade Castanets here in St. Augustine, Florida. I want to do a little video today. I want to go over some technical stuff. I've covered technical stuff and over these videos in the course of the last couple of years, but I hadn't really pinpointed together, put all the information together where I can read it out to you, where and it'll be information that you really need to know. Before we get started on that, this is technical. What I'm doing here, this is right now it's 9 foot and 1 inch long. It's going to be a 10-foot braided dacron mullet net that's going to Pensacola. Now, I have tied out, I finished I'm going to increase on a custom net. You know, I put heavier material in the top and heavier material at the bottom. I've explained that before about the reasons for that. Now what I've done, I've cut out this net. I'm going to increase it from 30 pound test to 50. So I want to show you that right quick. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go around halfway to the other side of this net to tie back in. You don't, anytime you cut out, always go, when you tie back in, always go halfway around. And you can see what I'm doing. I'm just simply pulling this thing till I get to the halfway around it. Then I'm going to tie in, and then we're going to get on to the technical stuff. But anyhow, you can see what I'm doing. All right, I'm fixing to come in here, and I'll find me a winding, and I'll go just a couple of meshes to the left of it. I don't know if Phil can see that, but you probably can't see that winding. But anyway, with that said, I'm going to come in here. I'm going to come inside. You can see I'm picking up that mesh. I leave a nice, good, long tail, probably 3 or 4 foot. It's called the tail. This is the needle line. Now to tie back in, to continue on and put my last 11 rows on this thing to complete it, I'm going to just come in here and just see what I did. I just came through that mesh. I simply came through it. I want you to understand that. I picked up that mesh. I was a couple of meshes the other side of the widening. Now I'm going to just take and make a simple loop. 1 knot. That's all I'm going to do right here. And I'm going to pull that nice and snug. Take my gauge. I'm just going to tie a couple of meshes. I'm going to lay this down and get busy. I'm going to pick up a couple of meshes here to get out of the way. Now this is 50 pound test. Up here is 30. Up in the very top is 18 inches of 50 pound test. All right, I'm fixing to put this down. I think you understand that pretty much what you want to do when you, with that said, I'm going to put me a couple of half hitches now on this needle, because I don't want this stuff it'll loosen up. This much line on here. I use a large needle. As you can see, I don't like a lot of knots, even at this. As far as this net is around, this net is going to be 532 knots around this net. I got 1 more winding row. After I put that winding row in, it's going to be 532 meshes around it. So I'll be lucky to put 3.5, possibly 4 rows, and then I'll have to stop and fill the needle. All right, let's put this aside. Now let's get on to some technical stuff that I want to bring up to you, that you understand. You know, it's a ratio of widenings and meshes in a Menorcan castanet. Now understand, my heritage is Menorcan. My family came from Isle of Menorca back in 1768. They settled in New Smyrna, Florida, and there's books and all. I won't go into the history of that. But anyway, now the Menorcan net makers, there's many ways to make a net, and I ain't gonna sit here and tell you that I've got the best way, but I've definitely got as good as there are. there's no better way of doing it than what I've been showing you for some time. After what I saw here recently, I had a gentleman from Louisiana as a gift. He sent me a couple of, I can't believe how he found this, but he went someplace looking for, he was trying to find a sinkhole. He went to a junkyard, and this place had some boxes with completed nets in it, and he bought 531 nets, blanks, just like you see this. No sinkers, no nothing, just as if you saw this. 531 nets, various sizes from 2 foot, 6 foot, and anyway, he sent me a 6, a 5, and a couple of 4s, completed, ready for the sinkers. But the issues with them and what brought me into bringing this up to you today is the importance of having enough webbing in a net. You want enough webbing in a net. It needs to be full where it'll open freely. It won't be struggling to open because, and I always tell people it's like having a tennis racket if it's too tight. But anyway, these nets, they started with 13 meshes in the top. I couldn't believe it. They started the windings right away, and you have 13 windings around, and you run the windings all the way to the bottom. I counted the meshes. I know how many meshes are in the bottom of a 6 foot net of mine, and this thing was over 60 meshes less than my nets. And I consider what I do simply, you really shouldn't go any less. But anyway, let's get on down to the business. Back in the early days, I'm talking 250 years ago, my Minorcan ancestors, they made what we call a 21 winding net. And that is, they start with 63 meshes in the first row. Then they would knit down about 12 plain rows. Then they'd start their windings, and they'd put in a winding every 3 meshes, which we do all along. We'd start 3 meshes apart. 3 times 21 is 63. Then they could put the final 10 or 12 rows with no windings. Now that's an awful lot of webbing in a net. So as time went by, they decided to come up with better ways to do things, so they cut back on the windings. They started making 16 winding nets. Now when I first learned, they were still making 21 winding nets. In fact, I had old timers argue with me that if it didn't have 21 windings, then it wouldn't open. But anyway, nevertheless, they dropped to 16, and the 16 windings, you start with 48 meshes in the first row. Then you knit down about 7 or 8 rows to begin your first winding row. Same formula, always 3 apart, and 3 times 16 is 48. Then the final 7 or 8 rows, no windings required, and you always end with a double row. Always end with a double row, and the reason of that is that's where you're gonna secure that lead line to it. And you want, some people go to a larger size. You could go to a number 9 instead of a double row, but I can tell you something, it makes a big old bulky knot, and they will loosen. Now, especially when you go to tie them on the foot line, there is a tendency to loosen on you, so I don't recommend using a single line. Next, my father, whom I learned from 70 years ago, started making, and others, and of course, I've been making 14 winding nets for many years. So he started a 14 winding, and that's where I'm at today. You put 42 meshes in the first row, 7 plain rows, then you go to, that is, when you start the net, you put 7 rows with no windings. The 8th row, you start putting in a winding, you want to put them every 3 apart. 3 times 14 is 42, then your final 7 rows with no windings, and of course the last row is a double row. Now, remember, so when I start my windings, my first winding, I'll put in 1 mesh, a winding, 3 and a winding, 3 and a winding, 3 and a winding until I finish up. Understand something, anytime, and I've told you this many times, when you start a net, mesh number 42, you tie 41 loops. Your 42nd mesh is when you take the tail of that net that I showed you and your needle line, you come together and you tie a knot, the distance of that mesh board, that's number 42. If you don't, you're going to mess up big time. You're going to get all out of whack. So the tie-in is number 42. All right. No matter what length you make the net, the last row should always be a double row as it attaches to the lead line. I made myself these notes because I'd forget stuff if I didn't do it. And I just got through telling you the first you tie 41 meshes, number 42 is when the tail and the needle lines come together, forming mesh number 42. Same with whether it's a 16 or 21/9 wide end, it's done the same. Now, to figure the circumference, we spread that net out on the ground. We start here and we go all the way back around to where we started to figure how much foot line you need. The formula for that is, and I don't care what size, length of net it is, it's going to be the same. It's going to be the length. That is, if it's 7 foot, 7 and 7 is 14 times 3. So that's going to be 42 feet. That's how much it's going to take, how much lead line it's going to take from when you start sewing them on till you go all the way around and finish. It's going to take a minimum of 42 feet. I always advise people when you buy your lead line, get 2 or 3 foot extra. Get 45 foot instead of 42, because you'd have to be mighty good to end up 42 feet. Believe me. So. But anyway, you're going to run a little bit over. You don't want to run much short or too much over. You want to be cautious with that. I've explained that in other videos how to do that. There's a video on sewing your sinkers on, so it tells you that. Okay, I think I've covered that. Now I use a 1/4-inch solid braid nylon for my lead line, and of course my sinker. I'm going to show you them in a few minutes. Now braid lines. I've never covered this, but I've had some questions about this on how many braid lines to put in a net. Okay, my formula is for the 3, 4, and 5 foot nets, I'll use 14 braid lines. That is, you're going to put one in line with each. You look up your net, every row of widenings that come down, that's where you're going to put well, we call them tucks. Now they call them braid lines. Now for the 6 foot, I increase it to 16. Therefore, you're going to have to count the number of sinkers and divide it by 16. That's going to tell you how far apart. I try to keep them somewhere between 10 and 12 apart at the most. 7 foot net, I increase it to 18. 8 foot, I increase it to 20. 9 foot's going to be 22. And a 10 foot net, I'll put 24. You can add more. If you think you need more, add more, but I wouldn't go any less. Okay, now, I think I covered that. On putting the sinkers on, I place my sinkers every other mesh. So, if you had a net that had 200 meshes around the bottom, it's going to take 100 sinkers. You put them every one apart. Now, however, there are some places out there that you buy sinkers, that you can buy them, and they're 1.5 ounces a piece. That's a big sinker. You may want to consider dropping it to put them every 2 apart. In other words, you tie in a sinker, 2 plain meshes a sinker, 2 plain meshes a sinker. That would lighten it up. All right, I think I've also covered this in the video. Something I've never covered before is hand line. Now, how much hand line should you put? That may be up to you. I'm going to tell you what I do, but you may want to put more, you may want to put less. If you're fishing off a dock, if you're fishing out of a boat, you're fishing in deeper water, then obviously you got a tide running, you're going to want a little more hand line. Okay, my ratio is a 3 foot, and I make 3 foot nets, believe it or not, for kids. Occasionally I'll get a request for for someone wants to buy a little net learner for the grandson, I'll make a little 3-foot net. I'll put 6 foot of hand line. 4 foot, I'll increase it to 8 foot of hand line. 5 foot, I'll increase it to 10. Now, 6 foot, I'm going to increase it to 18. 7 foot, I'm going to go up to 22. 8 foot, I'm going to put 30 foot of hand line. Now, this is a hand line. This goes up at the top. Hand line, 30 foot, 9 foot, 35, and this net here will have, the customer has requested 50 feet. Normally, I would put 45 foot on a 10-foot net because in most cases, a 10-foot net, you're going to be throwing it off of a pier, a dock, a bridge, boat, so you're going to want a little more hand line. I wouldn't get the hand line too long because understand something, when you throw it out, you got to pull it in. So the more you got is the more bulk. However, you can use what you think. That's what I'm going to put it at that. Okay, now I think I've covered that stuff. Now, this gentleman that wants this net, he called me and requested a 12-foot handmade net. I don't make 12-foot nets. It's just too much webbing, too much weight. It's just, I'm going to explain it to you right quick. On a 12-foot mullet net, and I'm talking about a mullet net, you would have 644 meshes around the bottom. That would mean it would take 322 sinkers. That's a lot. I told him, you know, the biggest nets I make or that I care to make. If I made a 12-foot, you'd pay dearly for it. 10-foot. This net here, when I finish, will have 532 meshes and 266 sinkers. That's what this net. You have to have weight. The net has to sink to catch fish. A common complaint I get from people on these panel nets, especially cheap Chinese nets, is there's not enough weight. This net here, when it's finished, is going to weigh 15 pounds. A 10-foot Chinese net will weigh about 8. It probably 7 or 8. There's just not enough weight. They don't sink good. A 10-foot, this net right here, when I get finished with this net, I'll put it up against any 12-foot Chinese net you can buy, and it'll catch more. It'll throw twice as easy and cover so much more ground and catch more fish than any 12-foot Chinese net. Now, I'm not going to say anything about there's net makers out there that make beautiful panel nets. They know what they're doing. They put the right amount of weight on it. They'll make a good net. I ain't talking about these folks. I'm talking about the Chinese nets that you can buy a 12-foot net for less than $100, free shipping from China. How they do it, I don't know. But anyway, enough of that said. I want to end up with just showing you a few things here. Phil, you're going to have to bear with me a minute. I'm going to show you. We got to talk about the horn that goes in the top of a net. Very important. There's so many different types of horns on the market today. What I use, and I've been using for well, most of my 70 years. For a while there, back in we used to have a slaughterhouse here where you could go and get cow horns, but it closed up back in the early 60s. So we got you couldn't get cow horns, so you reverted to plastic. But this is a cow horn. This is going in the top of this net. This was a cow horn, as you can see that I have cut this thing out. I didn't cut the hole in it, but I've drilled my holes in it for attaching, making sure that net will stay firmly in it. A couple of holes for hanging it. The swivel, important, the swivel. The braille lines go around the end of this swivel here, and it sits right here. Okay, that's the way that's going to go. I put my 3/8 diameter, I use 3/8 diameter braided poly line. I run it through here. I take and I tie a knot. I'll pull that thing good and tight, and I'll leave probably about 3/8 or a half inch sticking out of that knot, which I'm going to light with a match, and I'm going to burn it down. And just before it gets right to that knot, I'll take a rag or a water paper towel, and I smear that molded poly into that knot. It will never in hell ever come loose. Don't ever think it. I can't tell you how many nets I've made and never had one that's come loose. So, with that said, I'm gonna put that aside. Now we're gonna get said about plastic. Here's a plastic. You can't buy these anymore. Phil and I have looked everywhere for these things. There was one place in St. Augustine that I think Phil bought the last ones they had. They had 6 or 8 left, and he bought them all. But that's a little plastic horn that would tie up in the top of that net, and you got notice the swivel. The swivel needs to stop. Can you see that? You can see that.
I'm going to zoom in.
Has to stop. I'm going too fast. The swivel needs to stop right there because your braille lines are going to be attached to this. Come through it, down and attached to that layer line. You want it to stop right there, and your hand line goes from here. All right. With that said, this is some of the stuff you find on the market today. This is a little, I don't know, some kind of little composite or plastic ring that would go on the top of that net. But there's an issue with this. And the issue is that you do not want that swivel to go inside of that net. Absolutely, you do not want it. You can buy them, they have them with separators now that won't happen. You can buy good horn setups out there. They're on the market. Jan's Netcraft sells this stuff. Good people to deal with. But locally, we get our swivels, and we were buying those horns here locally for up to just a year or so ago. They said they're on order, but I've looked and looked and looked on the internet. I don't think they make them anymore. Anyway, with that said, important is to getting a good horn and swivel to go on the top of your net. The sinkers that I make, these sinkers on my molds, 22 to the pound. Instead of 16, these are 22 to the pound. Just perfect weight. My shrimp nets, around 30, 32. On a shrimp net now you use a smaller sinker because you have a smaller mesh. So you use a smaller sinker for your shrimp net. Mullet net and a shrimp net. A couple of last quick things. We talk about I use the, that's a 1/4 inch solid braid nylon. That's what those sinkers I make fit on. They fit on this thing so pretty and tight. And when you sew them on that net, there's no sliding around. I've showed you about that before. And this is a 3/16 or 5/32, I'm not sure. There are some of your older nets, panel nets that you buy, that's what they use. They use a smaller diameter. And this, of course, the sinker holes is small, and so you would use a smaller line. Memphis net and twine is where you want to buy your twine. I'm going to go and show you the twine. About to wrap this thing up. Memphis net and twine, they've got their name on it. Wonderful people. They sell, this is a bonded nylon seine twine. It comes in a pool spool, 1 pound spool. It comes in 3, 4, 5, 6. I use number 6 in the top. Put usually about maybe a foot of number 6 in the top of a handmade nylon net. Then I'll come down a couple of feet, 2 or 3 feet of number 5, and at the bottom. Then I'll drop back to 4. The bulk of the net will be done with 4. Then I'll finish up with about 6 or 8 rows of number 6, and of course my double row. All right. Then Dacron, I buy my Dacron, and this is Cortland. This came from Gooseneck, Goose Bay up in the Northeast. Goose Bay, you can look them up. Goose Bay Outfitters. They sell all sorts of the largest bait and tackle shops up in the Northeast, up in Maine. This is Cortland Dacron. That's fishing line. I've told you that before. That is fishing line. I can buy it in a 2,500 yard spool. And of course, the tools you need to make a net. If you're going to make a shrimp net, you're going to use a smaller diameter gauge, a needle, and a smaller gauge, depending on what size mesh you make. I do not make a mesh under a 1/2 inch. This is a little over 1/2 inch, and I try to keep it around between 5/8 and a 1/2. There's the needle for that, and of course, your mullet net. Notice I like a long needle, and I've told you this before, simply because, darn it, the phone's ringing. Anyway, I'm gonna ignore that. I make all my own tools, use ebony, and love ebony. It's good. It's a good hard wood, so that's what you want to use. I think I've pretty well covered everything. If there's any questions, we have a website. It's menorcanmagic, one word.com, menorcanmagic.com. Got some information on that. I have several YouTube videos that you might enjoy. I've covered a lot. I've tried to cover all of this information because there's more and more people that contact me that are starting to make their own nets, and once you learn, you know, you'll increase your speed and stuff as you go along, like anything else. Again, Memphis Net and Twine on your nylon, all of your poly lines. They're the cheapest, best people to deal with around. Needles and gauges, Jan's Netcraft again. They sell plastic needles and plastic gauges. A lot of guys, and I recommend making your own. You can make your own stuff. I did a video a while back. I think we did one, didn't we, Phil, on making needles?
Yes.
I think we did. So we've covered that. I don't know of anything else. I'm just sitting here wasting your time. Anything further? I have a new phone number. If you want to call me, I'd love to hear from you. If you're interested in a handmade net, you can call me at the area code is 904, and it's 217-7974. The phone number's on the website. But anyway, I think I've covered everything I can humanly cover now. I don't know of anything else. If there's any other questions, please contact us. We'd love to hear from you. With that said, for goodness sake, stay safe out there, and take care of yourself. All right, another gun flap. Oh, Phil's getting one last view of this net. I'm sorry. This net is it's a beauty, I gotta tell you. It is an absolute beauty.